Finding the wavelength of two different sources, we start with this equation here, which can then be arranged to find this equation using a starting and ending position of the micrometer and adding K, our calibration factor for the interferometer. It is important to note that the actual values for M1 and M2 do not need to be known, only the difference between them. To measure the wavelength of the mercury source, the interferometer was set up to give circular fringes, and then the micrometer was moved in one direction and 50 fringes were counted. Once the fringes were counted, the micrometer was ready to give the difference between the source image positions, which was then used to calculate the wavelength of the mercury source. The procedure used to find the wavelength for the mercury source was then repeated for the low-pressure yellow sodium source.
These are the wavelengths found for the different sources in this part of the lab.
The wavelength found for the mercury source was 603.9 nanometers, which gave a 10.6% error. The wavelength found for the sodium source was 585.6 nanometers, giving a 0.63% error. As the micrometer moved through a large range for the sodium source, the contrast between the fringes varied. Errors in this experiment could have been caused by miscounting fringes or misreading the micrometer.
For measuring spectral line separation, zeros or nulls are regions where there is no fringe modulation which have a separation found using this equation. And solving for the wavelength separation gives this equation. The source separation is the spatial frequency between the two interference patterns from the two wavelengths emitted by the sodium source.
To measure the spectral line separation, we started by finding a null. At this point, we took the measurement of the micrometer, using this as our initial value. Then, the micrometer was moved through two more nulls, taking the micrometer reading at each null. Using the distance between two nulls, we then found the spectral line separation to be 0.593 nanometers.
Using the distance between the two nulls as d source, the wavelength separation was found to be 0.593, giving an error of 1.167%.
The refractive index of air does not only depend on temperature, but also pressure, humidity, and wavelength. As pressure of the air increases, so does the refractive index.
To measure the refractive index of air, we used a helium neon laser to produce circular fringes, and then the number of fringes were counted as air was pumped out of the cell up to specific points.
Using the data from the experiment, the measured change of refractive index with pressure was found to be 3.33 times 10 to the negative 6 inverse centimeters mercury. The calculated refractive index of air at sea level was found to be 1.00013, which gave an error of 0.017%.